currently he's the chairman of Covair. He has many other, worked with many other companies, and I will let him talk about it rather than me talking about it. He is also working with many other non-profit organizations. Again, I will let him talk about that, as we are here to listen to him and not to us. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So first of all, thanks for having me. You know, the word Titan is intimidating. So when I got the first call saying, you know, you'll be speaking, so I said, hey, I'm not a Titan, right? And you never, ever talk about yourself, right? So this is the first time that I had to put together my own horn to toot and saying, okay, what am I going to say? And just to make sure I was not too far off, I asked my two daughters, saying, you know, send me an email telling me what you think are my strengths, right? So that I'm bouncing off, you know. Sometimes the kids are very honest. They're brutally honest sometimes. How many of you, some of the younger people have small children, right? But by the time they go to college and they have the freedom to speak, I mean, intellectually with you, right? Yeah. They can be very harsh, right? So, but I think my assessment and their assessment was very close. So what I'm going to do is talk about multiple stages of my life, right? So I am one of the invitees who is at the very, you know, end of his career, okay? You have invited other young people who are bright and coming up and have made millions and so on. But for me, I'm speaking a little bit of history here, of my own career. But the positive aspect of that is that you'll get to learn about the entire life story in a way, okay? Which you may not hear from a 40-year-old, right? So talking from childhood to early schooling to college degree, coming to the US, early career, some of the difficulties, you know, rough times. Then I go into my first startup life. What are the success factors for a startup? What are my personal qualities or traits? Then after the first startup success, what are some of the other startup successes? And then some of the venture investments, etc., that I was making, and then giving back. Okay? So I'll cover a lot of ground. I was told to talk about some of these things, so even though they may not be relevant in terms of, you know, career or startup, but I was born in Rajkot. My family originates from Bhuj, Kutch. So we are what we call Gurjar Mania, meaning non-Kutchi speaking Kutchi. Okay? So the other Gujaratis think of us as Kutchis, the true Kutchis don't think of us as Kutchi, right? Say, oh, you're the wrong Kutchi. So the family came to Rajkot during the Second World War when they were all, you know, driven away from Burma, partly because it was occupied by the Japanese, and Indians who could come back to Burma did. And so my parents were married in Burma, actually during the blackout days in Rangoon when it was being bombed by the Japanese, right? So they tried to make a living. It was very difficult, much more competitive in Rajkot than in Burma. My father almost had to take up a job in Karachi. At that time, Karachi was a very prosperous, you know, thriving business center. And because it was still undivided India, you could go there. And my grandfather was trying to run a wholesale tea business. There was no rice business in Rajkot, right? In Burma, they were all rice merchants. They struggled. Eventually, in the early 50s, decided to go back to Burma. So in 1952, I went back to Burma. I mean, I shouldn't say I went back because I was born in India, but went to Burma for the first time and stayed there through my high school. And to make a long story short, because they lived in a small town, they were always concerned about the quality of my education. So after 3rd grade, I was sent off to India to live with my uncle in Kolkata. Did that for a while, then came back to Rangoon again, because my uncle, being a government servant, was getting transferred. So again, that was instability for me. So came back, stayed alone in Rangoon with my cousin in an office setting. So think of a 13, 14-year-old by then, 7th grade, 6th grade. So by the day the office was on, so we couldn't really sleep or do anything, right? So at night we would have the office facility accessible for homework, etc. And then we used to eat in a mess, right? And then later on, my uncle, the other uncle, established a home in a suburb of Rangoon, and I lived with them. And then later on, my mother came from the small town to Rangoon to establish our own household. So that is how I finished high school. So those of you who have children and are talking about Harker versus, the best public schools in Cupertino or Saratoga, don't work that hard. if I given my story, I wouldn't have been a flunky, right? I wouldn't have made it this far. So the thing to emphasize though with your kids are the values, whether they're doing their homework, whatever they're supposed to do, are they doing or not? And with that, making sure that they're progressing. Yes, everything helps. There's always a discussion between Harvard versus Berkeley, right? Is a private college better than a public, best public college for you? So this is what I learned. What it taught me was independent, okay? By the time you're 13, if you're going away and have to make your own decisions, right? So, very independent decision making, and I did that all the way through after that, right? Accepting things as they come, exposure to many locations. So, I was born in Rajkot. My father had TB. And so we had to go to Miraj for a year to live there until he got operated. Went to a small town called Prom in Burma, stayed for a while in Rangoon, and about a year and a half of schooling in Calcutta, right? So by the time I was in high school, I had exposure to all these places, and I spoke Burmese fluently, and besides English, Hindi, etc. by the time you finished high school. So the multiplicity of experiences, I think, is somewhat, it has its value. It may have its aspect of instability, but it also teaches a person how to behave in multiple environments. Okay, so college. I didn't have formal Burmese language training in school. I could read, write, etc. But it wasn't that I had learned Burmese formally in school, and because most of the Indian schools in Burma used to follow the West Bengal Secondary Board curriculum. Since we were close to Calcutta, that is the syllabus we used to follow. And so that, of course, didn't include Burmese as a language, right? So the Burmese university would not admit me. My father's idea was that we're going to live in Burma forever. Right? Unfortunately, that didn't happen, or fortunately, whatever. So I had to come to India all of a sudden at the last minute. And so, being the fact that the Calcutta results, timing, etc. is different from Bombay, I was forced to come to Calcutta. Attended St. Davis College, and then later on went to Jadavpur University, did my engineering, etc. In the process, learned good Bengali, by the way. And then my my life in Calcutta was very, very focused to study. Okay? I used to live alone with a roommate. We both used to eat at the same place. So, total dedication to studies. In fact, my friends used to think that I'm a very boring guy. The only time I would agree to go to movies would be in the night shows when all my work is done, and so on. So, did well in school. Coming to Calcutta from a small town, again, was intimidating. Okay? This huge place. When I first arrived, actually, I came with my grandmother when I was 13 or so, the first time I came. So, Esplanade area. Anybody been to Calcutta? Okay. So Esplanade area is all lighted, bright, so I asked my grandmother, right? So never seen such crowds of people in Burma. So very intimidating environment. And that day my uncle didn't show up to pick us up at the airport because some miscommunication. In those days we were sending telegrams, right? So some of you, by the way, may not even know that, right? And officially last year, Indian Post and Telegraph has stopped sending telegrams. Yes. You cannot go to post office in India and send a telegram, right? Again, what lesson did I learn, right? So, I think in engineering college, the most important thing was understanding the fundamentals. Right? I was very, very dedicated to make sure I understood them. And the reason being that, at the high school level, yeah, I had exposure to science and so on, but not such a high level of science. Right? So I just want to make sure that I was not missing anything. So in Calcutta, I think the same word probably is used in other colleges in India. Students who have fundamentals clear are called people with funda, right? So guys who don't attend lectures, don't write notes, right? Guys who are sitting in the canteen all the time, right? Would come to me and I have my notes, right? I can explain what happened, right? So that was the most interesting part of going through engineering college for me because everything was a challenge. And if you didn't keep up with it, one other thing I realized, by the way, that a lot of these people who sat in the canteen but, did well in the exams were very bright. I mean, they were brighter than me, I immediately realized. Because with a lot less work, they were still succeeding. So I'm saying, hey, why is it taking me so long, right? So I must be thicker than that. So that's why I was always trying hard. Then hard work, as I mentioned, and focus. Didn't get it distracted with anything in Calcutta. However, I did build a remote correspondence relationship with the person who is my wife. Used to write letters to her, and over the years, fell in love, and eventually we got married. So that was one other accomplishment of my college days. Okay, so marriage and US education. So since we knew each other, we got engaged early, right after my college. Then when I wanted to come here, the dilemma was whether I get married or not. I didn't want to get married. I said, let me go, come back in 2 years. So her parents are not willing to believe that. And my parents said, if it was our daughter, we would feel the same way. So you should get married. So here I'm getting married without a penny of income, without a job, totally depending on my father. Even if I want to take Rekha to dinner, it was on his money, not my money, right? So very embarrassing type of feeling to get married. But we did that. Came here alone, of course. At that time, it was not that easy because I was coming on loans. after leaving Burma, my father had lost most of his money for two reasons. All the businesses were nationalized, and all the big currency was demonetized in Burma. And even whatever money you had, if you wanted to send it to India, there was about a 5-to-1 ratio. So you give 5 times the chats in Burma, and you get, if you give 500, you get 100. And so in the early 2-3 years of my college, I had to do tuitions to, keep myself supported. But once I was in Madison and realized how cold it was, luckily though, after one semester I got a teaching assistantship and was able to bring Rekha, and we both lived there through the rest of my stay to finish my master's degree. But because of weather, immediately decided that I'm going to go to California. Didn't look for a job in the Midwest, didn't go to Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. So, however, the first 2 jobs for me, again, if I go back to history, you'd say, how did I make it here? First job, at that time, this was the time when Vietnam War was winding down, early 70s, right? Most defense companies were laying off people. And so all the subcontractors who supplied components or whatever electronics to the defense companies were having some tough times. So the first job that I got, within a year the company went under. It took 2-3 months again to get another job. A few months later, the same thing happened to that small company. So I seriously at that time thought about going back to India, saying, US is not working for me.
What year was that?
This is 72 time frame. No, I'm sorry, 70, 71. Then it so happened that one of my bosses from the last company that went under got a job in Sunnyvale. Bill Whitworth is his name. Don't know if he's living anymore or not, but he called me. Said I may have a job for you. So that's how I became a Bay Area resident in 1971. Worked for this company called Applied Technology for about 2.5 years. They were making, those of you who are in electronics, hybrid microcircuit modules for defense. So they used to make a system called ALR-45 that was in the cockpit of a fighter that would detect radar signals. So anybody following that aircraft on radar, the pilot would immediately know and take whatever evasive actions. So that miniaturization needed a lot of hybrid circuits. So I worked in that, but while doing that, realized that this can be a long-term thing. This is an interconnect technology that's someday going to be replaced. So I didn't have a strong background in electronics for my master's degree because I was too hung up on learning control theory. Control theory is all math. By the time I was done with about 4 classes for my master's degree, I realized that all I learned was mathematics, not really engineering. Okay? Because you were solving all kinds of equations for optimization and for, stability and this and that. Anyway, so I felt that I had to increase, if I was to succeed in this valley, I need to know analog circuits, digital circuits, IC technology and all. So early morning program in Santa Clara, I think it still runs. They call it the early bird program. 7 to 9, you go get the graduate level classes. So I took about 4 of those classes over these 2 years that I was working at Applied to feel that, okay, now I would be able to go interview at Fairchild or National. These were the top semiconductor companies of the day, to even meaningfully interview them, right? So did that with 3 companies, Motorola, National, and Fairchild. And out of that, I chose Fairchild.
and became part of their product engineering group in the analog circuits. And from then on, I never had to look back for my career. Because with all this instability that I had, almost, no money, few months at the unemployment office, it leaves a very negative impact on your mental state. So when I got this job at Fairchild, I mean, even applied technology was a good job, right? But I didn't think of it as a long-term career job. Plus defense was always something I didn't care for. Meaning, yeah, it's there, you'll have a job, but the red tape and all the things that go on in a defense company, very bureaucratic. A guy like me would not survive there. So, once I was at Fairchild, the semiconductor technology was very up and coming, right? Why this thing is called Silicon Valley. So the Fairchild, National, AMD, Intel, all these were, except for Fairchild, which was an established company, Intel, AMD, National, they were all considered, advanced stage startups then. Okay? So a lot of opportunities. But because I had been burned by the instability, I stayed put at Fairchild, didn't want to move, right? People who are leaving would leave, and then a year or two later, they'll come back and say, hey, it's the same, right? They go with great enthusiasm and saying, I'm going to Intel. 2 years later, when you talk to them, you say, it's about the same, right? So that way, I spent 11 years at Fairchild. Unusual in the chip industry. But I grew through the ranks, did all kinds of jobs, got very diversified. The last job I ran was an operations job where I ran actually again a military components operation, which had about 300 people. So everything except sales and marketing was part of my job. And so in those 11 years, I did engineering, I did quality and reliability. I was quality reliability director for the whole division. Got to travel to every Fairchild plant overseas. I mean, that you cannot believe an experience that you can get from a job like that, right? At that time, the Japanese were becoming a big story in the chip industry quality. Because when CEO of HP, Andrew Young, publicly makes a statement that Americans are not able to provide the same memory quality as we get from the Japanese, right? So the American management of the chip industry was really shaken up. About the same time, I was given this quality job, saying go fix the quality, because we had customers in Japan. Fairchild was one of the few companies qualified to supply to NTT at that time. Okay? But the distributor would send us parts back. Every week we get some parts back saying, hey, these regulators are not marked properly, there's a pinhole here, the leads are bent, there's tarnish on the leads. So all these things we said, this is external, has nothing to do with the working of the chip. Why are they complaining, right? But they wanted a perfect part, right? So anyway, I learned a lot. I went to Japan several times to meet these people and say, okay, tell me why this is not good, and so on. So the quality job taught me everything about making semiconductors from incoming wafers to outgoing product, right? And so by that time, I was very ripe for a startup company to be hired, right? And it so happened that my boss at Fairchild, who had left a year and a half or so ago, had become CEO of Altera. How many of you know of Altera? So, 84 was the year when Altera was in its second year. And so I was recruited to become the operations director of Altera. to actually help them make the chips. And this was a new concept then, what we call fabless companies now, where Altera, Xilinx, and Chips and Technology, these were the three first startup companies with a fabless model, right? So with my knowledge of the entire process, I could at least go to vendor and tell them what we want, because we're not making anything in-house, right? And on the other hand, convince the customers. So if I have a customer in Fujitsu or HP or Hitachi or AT&T here, you have to really convince them that you as a startup without your own manufacturing will be able to meet their demand. And how are you going to do that? So unless you know the entire process, you cannot do that. A sales guy cannot do that, a marketing guy cannot do that. So I became the ambassador for Altera in visiting all these companies, right? And I was able to build a type of a rapport with the customers, and Japanese customers in particular, very, very detail-oriented, right? So if you cannot satisfy them in detail, they're not going to trust you, right? So all this knowledge of 11 years at Fairchild came to real use. Every visit I went, I felt that, okay, I was able to answer the question. So, I guess I've lost track of my, where am I? Yeah, early career continued. Yeah. So one of the stories of this 11 years, lesson is rolling stone gathers no moss, right? So people these days want to leave companies every 2 years. I was interviewing actually a person in Kolkata, Kolkata, an office in Kolkata, India. Had a job at Wipro, had a job somewhere else. 2, 3 nice names, right? In 3 years, and he's coming and talking to me. I said, tell me, why should I hire you? He was never expecting this kind of question, you know, very, very harsh question. Say, hey, if you've gone to 3 companies in 3 years, right? At Wipro you stayed only 6 months. Why should I hire you? What makes me, confident that you'll even stay here, right? He didn't have a good answer. I said, all of you young people are running after these salary increments of 15%, 20% here. Think seriously. And by the way, any of you who are doing that, same message, right? When I look at a resume, when I'm hiring somebody, every 2 years, moved somewhere, it tells me either this person is not getting satisfaction out of any job, or he's incompetent, and people are taking 2 years to find that out and firing him, right? Then he goes on to another place. And there are a lot of people. Okay? So be very careful in how your resume looks, because it cannot be, a moving type of a resume. Okay? So rolling stone gathers no moss, and so if you're learning and growing, see, this is why I didn't leave Fairchild compared to others, right? I was satisfied with the compensation, being taken care of, I used to think that your bosses made a lot more money than you, right? And one day, accidentally at Fairchild, my boss and I shared office, right? So his paycheck was lying, right? And I found out that, okay, he's making only 12–15% more than me, right? So what's the big deal about salary? Salary is there. If you're getting paid properly, that's fine, but you shouldn't jump to, get a 15% raise, right? Because next year you'll be there. And it was a rule at Fairchild that every promotion, the standard raise was 7%. So if you got promoted from a senior engineer to a supervising engineer, you get 7%, right? Your base about and 7%. Next review, whatever happens will happen. So don't change the job for the sake of change, because you say I'm bored here. Not good for your career. Okay. So talking about management, right? So I know everyone is not going to start a company, but if you want to grow in a management capacity, first thing, again, continuing on my last point, stability and commitment, right? The management has to believe that, okay, if we give you a promotion, you will not use it as a stepping stone to go somewhere else. Give you a recent example again from my own company in India. What we found over the last 2-3 years, that guys that were good, we give them excellent raises, and we find that 6 months they're leaving. So why? Because he used my higher base to go even higher and leave the company. So what we did this year, we caught up with them. Said, okay, there are people who we gave 33% raise, right? So I said, okay, you will get this raise. If you want this raise fully cashed every month, then you sign a 1-year non-departure agreement with us. That means you'll stay here at least a year, right? And if you don't want to do that, anything over 15% will be held in escrow by the company. If you stay 1 year, you'll get it. If you don't, you lose it, right? So these are the kinds of things that the management has to resort to even, so those who didn't sign it immediately tells you that this guy is not maybe a long-term employee here, right? And none of them expected this kind of treatment from management, right? In a way, very creative. Right? Saying, okay, you have the raise, sign up for 1 year, you get the whole raise. If you don't, then we'll give it to you if you stay here 1 year. So the management has to have that trust before they promote you. Secondly, establishing this, and by the way, I'm saying this because Indians are weak in this, right? Through the years, I have found I have had Indian employees, I've had other employees, right? Black employees, all kinds of employees, because I've had 300, 400 people. So, first is your communication credible, right? Whatever you say, is it backed by data? Is it backed by some research, proper study, or are you winging it? Okay? And credibility of commitment, if you say you're going to do something, comes Monday and say, hey, I was too busy with something else, this and that. I personally never want to hear that, okay? I'd say that's your problem, that's not my problem. You make the commitment, you didn't deliver, right? And the worst thing that the Indians do, they go to India, say they'll be back in 2 weeks, right? And they send a letter or email or whatever. So I had a colleague at Altera who was Indian. He was from Kerala. So it happened with him. So my boss comes to me one day, he had this habit of coming to your door and starting to chat. Sometimes you feel he's wasting your time, right? He said, Bipin, you worked for me for a long time. I worked for him for 13 years, by the way. Very tough guy, between Fairchild and Altera. He said, you always tend to come on time. But Chaco always seems to have a problem. He either can't get flight reservations or he becomes sick. What do you think it is? So don't think that management doesn't know. They know. And if your relatives in India insisting, even at the expense of hurting their feelings, come back on time. Credibility, credibility, credibility. Only people that are credible get promoted and go higher. Others don't. Okay? Simple examples like this, okay? And by the way, that VP was gone within a year from Altera. He was fired. Showing commitment and dedication, whether it takes, working at night, weekend, whatever. Once you commit, you got to do it. Then a lot of us have this habit of saying, we're being discriminated. Okay? Not true. Now, I am saying that because every job that I felt that I should get or I'm deserving, I was able to get. Okay? So it's not your color, not where you come from, right? So if your communication is good, your knowledge is good, and most Indians are technically considered good, right? But can you communicate that? Right? And so your incompetence or your inability to please your management should not be, covered by discrimination. Okay? And give you an example. There's a very, very, Kanwal Rakhi, you've heard of him, right? I'll openly say that. Now, he wanted to become the CEO of Novell. He was their CTO, and he thought after Nurda, the CEO, retired, he should get that job, and he didn't. Okay? So he resigned, being upset and so on. Now, if you listen to Kanwal, he's a bright guy, IIT graduate, he's very, very good. But when you listen to him, half the time I don't understand him. Or, so you say, okay, if I was the board, this gentleman is very good, technically sharp, all that, right? But is he the CEO material to communicate to the investors, to the analysts, to whoever it is outside, right? So that is why a CEO job can be hampered by one little reason, and that is the communication, right? So one thing I have in one of these slides, so I say, okay, be on top of your communication, even the ability to communicate things in a larger meeting, technical ideas being explained properly, etc. So the last bullet here is join Toastmasters. How many of you have heard of Toastmasters? Okay, anybody join? Okay, good. So I became member of Toastmasters in the mid-70s, right? And spent about 5 years. And that helped me quite a bit. My A's are not good though. You know what the A's are in Toastmasters?
Sure.
Okay. So Altera, I did talk about it earlier. Actually, Altera, truly speaking, was my second startup. The first one I tried to create didn't succeed. There were 3 of us, and then the CEO who became CEO of Altera was the 4th guy. He was our CEO candidate. So when he left to become CEO of Altera, 3 of us technical and operations guys were left holding this plan. We met a couple of VCs, but we didn't have the ability to, at that time, to do anything about raising money, etc. So then I sort of became Rodney's, one of his helpers in making Altera succeed, right? So in those days, again, startups were not paying very well. I took an 18% pay cut to join a startup. These days, a lot of people coming to startups want a raise. They have no idea what the startup used to be in terms of salary cut, right? You are expected to make money later on after putting in sweat equity for maybe 5 years, 6 years, or 7 years, sometimes never, right? So by the time I would try to negotiate, saying, Rodney, can you do this? He said, Bipin, he was a very, very arrogant guy. He said, I told you the salary. No further discussion. You want to come? Come. Right? So I joined. I joined Altera because of 3 things. One is I had great faith in Rodney's ability. Very arrogant guy, but very intelligent guy. Extremely intelligent. He could look at a slide and see the numbers problems like anybody else had never seen before. In a minute, he would say, hey, your number is not matching what you're saying. And we had a colleague who used to do that all the time in meetings, playing politics with his colleagues. Bipin didn't do this, you know. So Rodney, in 2-3 staff meetings, when he became the general manager, he noticed this, that Mike always has a problem with other people, right? So he says, Mike, okay, and in those days we used to use these transparency foils, right? So I said, Mike, let me look at this slide. And he said, go to this slide. By third slide, he said, you know what? Your own numbers are not matching. Go do your homework before you tell me this in the staff meeting. So after 3 months, Mike was gone. So you really, really have to know your numbers. I mean, that's the other thing from a, you know, I get troubled by when I ask some of my guys today saying, okay, you know, how many defects did you have last week? They said, oh, I'll have to go look up. I said, you should have it and remember in your sleep. So being good with numbers was something that operationally was very, very important. Yeah? So 13 years at Altera were the best career years for me. Okay? And the reason I say that is very tough, very hard, but very successful. Made, you know, the biggest amount of money that I'd ever imagined, right? And it was all done very professional. Okay? So by that time, then I felt that, okay, I now want to run a company. So until then, I was not really considered qualified because I had operational experience but no sales and marketing experience. Right? So when I went to Japan to run Japan for 2.5 years for Altera, that gave me the sales and marketing experience. And I did that, by the way, at the cost of not moving my family there, because he did not, our boss in many ways was very cheap. So he didn't want to sanction an expat package for me to go to Japan and live there with my family. And he knew my mother was with me and all that. So he knew the family. So he said, this will be an expensive move, right? Plus, we had our own issues. My daughter was in high school, etc. So, so I took up that job just to get that sales and marketing experience. Gave up my operations job, right? So that made me, I thought, ready for a CEO job. Yes.
By then, how old were you when you started your first company?
Yeah, so I joined, so I was a very late startup guy. So I joined, I mean, I became a startup person around 40 years. Okay. So, and good thing that you're bringing that up. I wanted to make that point. So for some people, the best time maybe before you're married, before you have kids, before you have mortgage, right? And you do a startup and great, you know? If you starve, maybe you starve, right? You don't have to worry about your kid. So that's one way to look at it. The other way is to say, okay, after I have enough of savings or some reasonable bank balance, and these days, a lot of couples are, you know, two income couples, right? So it's easy. In my case, that was not the case, right? So once I felt that, okay, I'm now in a position to take this risk, I did that. Right? Okay. So for a success at a startup, again, this is something not profound, you probably already know, but the idea and the value proposition, you know, is it something that really is going to sell? How good is it? You know, the VCs or a lot of people in the industry talk about it, the Me Too idea. The other term you'll hear a lot is it an aspirin or a vitamin, right? So if it's vitamin, the VCs are not too hot, right? The market. Now, sometimes the product can create the market. You know, to me, Google is a perfect example. There was no search market as such. Right? I mean, if we had to search, we had to do a lot of other things. So it sort of created the market. this paid advertising on the internet, there was no market, right? They created the market. So some ideas will create the market, but not every idea has that capability. Right? The team, right? Now, you cannot start a company as a single person and raise money as a single person. So you have to have a team of 3 people, and the most essential people are your engineering person, your marketing person, and the guy who's going to run the company, right? The VCs want to know who these 3 people are. So don't even go to angels or VCs or anybody else to raise money before you know. Now these people may be working somewhere, right? But at least they're identified, they're willing to put their name down, and they're willing to come to, see the VCs when a meeting is called, right? So you have to have these people lined up, and the team is, of course everybody expects intelligent, sharp people, right? Experienced, dedicated. The main thing in a startup is dedication. You will have to give up a lot of things in your life if you really, really are in a startup where you have to give up a lot of day-to-day conveniences and schedules and all that. So the reason for flexibility is there's a term used these days a lot called fast failure, fail fast, right? So if one idea is not working, you have the flexibility to say, hey, that's not going to work, let's go do something else, right? So does the team have that capability to change? CEO is absolutely critical, and sometimes it's better to admit that we don't have a CEO candidate. We'll go recruit one, and that's what the Altera founders did, by the way. None of them, they were wise enough to think that, hey, none of us can run the company, right? So they went and hired an outside CEO, right? I'll tell you a story about that. Then, what is the quality and caliber of the board advisors? Don't, just because somebody's your friend, don't make him an advisor, right? Make sure you're going for the best people you can find, right? The speed of execution. So I say this repeatedly, all the time to my people. So the 2 advantages that startup has. One is that it's a good idea, hopefully. And the second is you're able to execute so fast as a team that you are able to beat your bigger competitors. So if you take these 2 things away, then as a startup, what do you have? Nothing. You have less money, you have less people, you have less resources, you don't have as many good labs, right? So what is a startup? So how effectively and quickly are able to run and with a good idea, right? So this is a very, very critical thing. Most people don't understand that. Okay. So this is something I have taken to heart. When I was president of Jain Center, how many people know Prakash Kaikwa? He's a visiting faculty at Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. Does a lot of CEO coaching, and at Thai we used to have a Thai institute that ran to. So he invited me and said, Bipin, as president of Jain Center, tell me how some of the Jainism principles can be used in corporate life. So I came up with these 3, which of course are well known, right? Samyak Gyan, Samyak Darshan, Samyak Charita, right? So the right knowledge, the right vision, and the right execution. So don't have to go too far. If you want to say, hey, what will succeed in a startup? It's these 3 things, You have the knowledge of the product, the market, etc. Are you able to create the forward-looking vision? And are you and your people executing it properly, right? So if everything is right, success will happen. So I was talking about this Altera founder who made a statement at the 10th anniversary, the importance of a CEO, right? So Bob Hartman is the founder who was the design VP, first design VP for Altera. So, and then Dr. Jim Sansbury was the technology. So they all interviewed their CEO candidate who was going to become their own boss, right? So when they checked reference for Rodney, the other guy said, very honestly, that he is an SOB, but he'll make you rich. And so Bob was remembering that 10 years later, that yes, exactly true. We hated working for Rodney, right? He was so, I mean, think of a guy who I would ship the best month as an operations VP, right? And in those days, there was no email at Altera yet. So comes in the morning, calls me up, said, "Bipin, good month, but your delinquency went up." So delinquency went up because some sales guy booked an order yesterday with same day delivery, which you know was impossible, right? So that's why my delinquency went up. But he, as a boss, was relentless, right? So you say, yeah, I get good marks here, but on delinquency, I didn't do so well, right? So all the time, he's such a pressure on you all the time, like a vice, right? Tightening every day. So now, I'm not saying all CEOs are good, but he always had the right reason, the right intellect, and the right logic, saying, why is this important, right? So one of the other things he used to tell us for a startup is, says don't believe in, so startups have a lot of hype, right? A lot of hype. PR, publicity, whatever, you exaggerate things, right? Product capability is sometimes, you may know there's a problem, but we're fixing it, don't need to tell the customer right now, right? So all these things go on. So Rodney would put us right by saying, guys, don't start believing in your own BS. So if you start doing that, then you're in trouble. You have to be very realistic. The example I give in politics of starting to believe in your own BS is Meg Whitman. When she used to put out all these ads on the radio, she started believing in those, and that's why she failed. Because whatever she was saying on the radio, a lot of it was not true. So, okay, coming to me, by the way, I know we are late, but we started late, so I guess, yeah. But I need to go to Napa for a wedding, so I need to leave too. So goals orientation is very, very important, okay? Now, again, a little story. Late 70s, I took a class in goal setting. It was being taught by a real estate broker, this adult education class, right? So one thing he said that was profound is that only 5 to 10% people ever set goals. Rest of them live their life, there's no goals. And he said in America, 80% of people who set goals achieve them. And that is really, really true, because in this country, if you set out to do something, you plan properly, execute properly, right? Get the knowledge, you can succeed, right? So the goal setting with the action plan. Dedication, commitment, emphasis on detail. Now that, I'm very, very detail oriented, sometimes at others' annoyance. So when I ask for data, right? Emphasis, data before decisions. My first boss at Fairchild, these are all gems, right? He taught me one thing. Bipin, data makes decisions. You don't need anything else. Data makes decisions. Then the corollary to that was, figures don't lie, but liars can figure. Okay? So, if you're an engineer, the most important thing for you is what we call intellectual honesty. So present the data with intellectual honesty. Don't try to twist it, don't try to massage it, don't try to, put spin on that data. Data is data, right? So if you want to say, if data is bad, admit that, hey, we didn't get the results we expected. This is the data, right? But a lot of engineers will go out of their way to finesse it. It's not going to enhance your career. Someday, it'll get caught up with you. So data before decision. Now, the normal accusation from Indians, by the way, when you ask them for a lot of data, don't you trust me after all these years? You know, I tell them I don't trust myself. Unless I see the data, I don't trust my judgment, right? And that's the fact. So to me, questioning somebody for data is not a trust issue. It's a, am I making the right decision issue for me? Taking feedback, being on top of things that are going on. So if you want to be a good manager, you cannot say I'm a total delegator. There are people like that do that, right? But delegation always has to be with control. Meaning, the person doesn't say one day that my boss doesn't care. He delegates and goes away, right? I delegate and check back, saying, hey, where are you on this, right? Even if something was given 3 months ago, fortunately my memory is good still, I'll ask them a question saying, hey, you never got back to me on this, what's the status? So that way the employees will know that this will not be forgotten. You know, they better not try to put it under the rug, okay? And I'm considered tough and demanding, but fair. Okay? So for the sake of the company, you have to be demanding. But you can't be unreasonably demanding. And if you're demanding, you have to do the same thing with everybody. You can't have, you know, variations in that. And keeping up technically as needed. You know, if I'm not a design engineer, I don't need to know the latest and greatest in this aspect of design, but I need to know enough to ask the right questions. So management is very much strengthened with the right question. So another example, we had a new general manager at Microsoft. One of the Indian guys used to be a member of TIE, knew him very well. He said, everybody talks about Bill Gates, you know, college dropout, etc. But he said, when I interviewed with him, it was amazing as to, at the right moment in the interview, he knew what question to ask. So as a boss, if you want upward mobility, you need to ask the right questions, right? In a meeting, in a group meeting, if you're thought to be asking nonsense questions, people know after a while. They say, this guy is, you know, he wants to ask questions, but he doesn't know what to ask, right? That's the impression you'll create. So asking questions is important, but asking the right questions is very important. And, you know, generally being well-read, right? So in a management situation, let's say if I go to a customer, right? And if I haven't done some basic homework or I don't know the history from the past, I'll not be able to create a you know, interesting conversation with them. So so besides your specific knowledge, general knowledge is also. Okay, what have I been doing after startup, etc.? So just to make it short, I invested in lots of startups, made some money, lost some money, created a small venture fund, ran it for about 5 years, couldn't raise the second one because we started during the bubble era. So I and a guy by the name of MeetTheTitanBipinShah did that. I had another wireless startup that didn't do well. Eventually we shut it down. We started the company here, took it to India, set up shop in Ahmedabad. Technology was successful, but business-wise, we couldn't do marketing and sales in India well. So, and I was busy with a lot of other things. So this was, we did try to do something, but didn't succeed. And then this Covair, where I'm involved today, started out as an angel investor, totally under a different value proposition. Help bring people like NEA and so on to invest in the company. NEA, Draper Richards, some of the names I'm forgetting. And then it didn't do well. After raising 16 million or something, the founders couldn't really deliver. So one day the board, I was not on the board asked me, hey, can you do something? So in my weaker moment, I said yes. I took it upon me, and I'm still doing it. All right? So I must not be doing a good job. The one thing I think I missed talking about in a startup, do you do a bootstrap or do you do a well-funded startup? My realization from Covair is you have to do a well-funded startup. Okay? Now, Covair is not in a position now to go get a lot of money because it's an old story, right? So VCs, when you go to them, they want to know how new is the story. If I say, hey, this is a 8-year-old story, they're not willing to. They say, okay, do whatever you do. Okay. Giving back a lot of things, particularly on the educational front, right? Involvement with Ekal Vidyalaya. How many of you know of Ekal Vidyalaya? Okay, only one. So Ekal Vidyalaya is a foundation that exists both in India and US and a few other countries, which focuses on primary education in very remote rural areas, right? Villages where a car doesn't reach, or you can only go there by bicycle or walking, right? So Ekal Vidyalaya was formed sometime in the 80s or maybe early 90s. We did the US Foundation in the year 2000. And then today, they have 58,000 schools in villages and educating more than 1.6 million children, right? So you may have heard of Pratham is the other primary education, but Pratham these days seem to be doing a lot of data gathering than actual educating. So Pratham's focus is on urban slum children or children of parents who are migrating. They may be carpenters today and farmers tomorrow, right? So during the off season, they go take their kids with them. So who is taking care of educating those children? So Pratham does a lot of those programs. So have been involved with Ekal Vidyalaya since year 2000. There's another education organization, college education, called FFE, Foundation for Excellence. So I was on the board for 4 or 5 years. Basic focus is fund scholarships for the top 15 percentile students in high school who are going to engineering or medical or dental colleges that cannot afford it. And the income level used to be 5,000 and 7,500, right? So right now, anybody whose family income is around that type of amount cannot pay for college. So FFE does 500-600 of those scholarships every year. Okay? One of the largest college scholarship program in India, actually, even though it's done from here. And people like Prabhu Goyal and Kanwal Rekhi. So Prabhu set aside 5 million from his, success to establish FFE. So I am one of the early supporters of Ahimsa Center in Cal Poly on the advisory board. JERF is a Jain Education and Research Foundation established about 3-4 years ago. So I am on their board, and if those of you who don't know this, the only professorship of Jainism in the US now has been established at Florida International University, and that's through funding from JERF. And then good bit of involvement at Cal Poly in Pomona, although not associated with that school, but through Ahimsa Center, I became associated, and I was in the the development council for the president, and then also on the advisory board for the dean. And recently, last 3-4 years, after IIT Gandhinagar was founded, 3 of us, Raj Mashruwala, how many of you know him? Okay, so Raj, myself, and Abhay Bhushan. By the way, the famous Bhushan who is part of AAP, Abhay is his brother. So this, most of IITs get a lot of funding like this through charity because their government salary scale, IITs are government institutions, so they cannot retain faculty or recruit faculty easily from here, right? So this kind of money pays them extra incentives for research projects, for students' visits to US for internships or presenting PhD papers. This kind of things are done from this kind of money. And in the last 4 years or so, we raised more than $400,000. So getting at least $100K a year from this. Okay, I think that I should shut up talking, and any questions? Yes.
I would say, I don't know, I've been thinking about this.
You want to take the mic here?
Get the mic.
Am I not audible?
It's okay.
Yeah.
Just anyone asking for a question, just say your name and.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm Sanket Mehta. Recently in the Bay Area, just about 3 months back, I was in Southern California where I completed my MBA. But I've been trying to frame this question for a while, and I hope I can do that. So, you talked about the struggle, and all the successful people that I've met usually have this struggle associated with them. Fortunately, unfortunately, I don't really have that struggle to talk about.
Struggle in what sense?
The early career struggle, the earlier day struggle. So I think but a lot of people who came to the US in earlier days, they actually had to be on their feet, and they really worked hard to kind of reach to the level that they are today. Maybe one of the reasons was that there were a lot more opportunities and probably a little lesser competition, especially among the Indian engineering community. Now today, as we stand, for someone like me who's been in the US for about 3 years now, and recently got into the job force, what is your advice in terms of how do we see opportunities going from here? Because I'm sure the dynamics that were 20, 25, 30 years back wouldn't kind of continue at this point. I don't know if I'm really framing the question well, but
yeah, I think your question in a way is very simple. That with all this competition, are there enough opportunities for you guys to grow to whatever levels you want to grow to, right? Is that a good summary?
In a way, yes.
Okay, so let me tell you my answer, okay? And the answer will depend on, are you optimistic about the future or pessimistic, right? So I think the opportunities are growing actually, right? We didn't have a company like Google start and grow to this extent, right? We didn't have a company like Facebook. Now, whether these are real technologies or not, etc., it's all debatable, right? But they absolutely are based on a technology doing certain things, right? So what has changed though is opportunities in hardware, in chips, etc., are declining in the mainland here, okay? They're growing in China, they're growing in Taiwan, they are probably growing in India, right? Because Intel has taken a lot of their design to India, right? So the opportunities are absolutely growing. The economies are growing. China and India were never growing. Now India has stalled recently, but if you say 8 to 10% growth for India, and all these huge companies continuing to hire every year, right? US is sending jobs abroad because they can't find enough people here. It's not that they don't have work, they don't have business, right? So what is important now though is how do you define your future career, right? So first of all, is it software, hardware, right? Is it, so software seems to be winning, or anything that's software based, right? So even hardware now requires a lot of software. When, Altera was the first example, for example, of a chip requiring a software to perform. Now almost every chip requires that, right? Because we had to do the logic design, do the minimization, do the optimization, create files for programming the chip, etc. Right? So all that was software. So Altera, along with chip design, had a good-sized software development group, right? So from that standpoint, I don't think opportunities are declining. Okay? Now, whether you want to stay in the corporate world or start something, I think that will become clear in a few years. Okay? I don't know if I answered your question, but that's how I think.
Thank you.
Okay? Yes.
Sorry, please finish.
Yeah.
Bipin, my question is, I know you are pretty successful, in fact I should say highly successful. However, there was any time that you struggled? And
Yeah, as I said, I struggled for the first 2 years of my career because of the economy, maybe the area. LA was very full of defense companies, right? So if they, just like they say, if they have a cold, everybody's, sneeze, right? Or whatever the saying is. So, but once I came here, I have not had to struggle in the Bay Area.
one more question before I let the floor to this gentleman. Every successful person, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, they have a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you didn't mention anything about any
About a
person
mentor.
as such. Did you have a mentor?
Okay, I never formally had a mentor. Okay? Part of it stems from this independent thinking that I talked about. So give you a very simple example. When I was preparing to come to USA, I was doing everything myself. Go to USIS, go to US Embassy. In Kolkata, there was an Indo-American club, right? Did everything myself. So my father one day told me that my sister's husband's family, they had three sons come to UK and US. He said, Bipin, tu gavu bhai kem kahin puchto nathi? Right? I mean, why am I not going to him to ask him, because he has sent 2 sons to US, don't I have any questions for him? Don't I need his help? And I said, no, I think I'm fully covered. I know all the answers that I need, so I don't need to go to him, right? So that was just my own attitude, right? I may have been helped, I don't know. But the guy, if you ask me who will I consider my mentor who has taught me the most things, is the CEO of Altera, Rodney Smith. Now, Rekha, even to this day, sometimes when she's upset with my methods, tells me, don't bring Rodney into the house. Okay, so.
Sure. Good enough.
So I'm going to say you don't have to necessarily answer my question, but
Sure.
since you have held top positions, directors, VP, CEO, you have never had to do anything wrong?
When you say I never had to do anything wrong?
For political reasons or situations that compel you, because of pressure from board or from other things. I mean, at that level, how do you handle?
If you say ethically wrong, I'd say no, I have not. Now, the very key aspect of that, though, and this is important, very important question, okay? what I knew, that this gentleman by the name of Rodney Smith had all kinds of ways to finding out or figuring out what was going wrong in the company. Very sharp, right? So if something went wrong in my own department, if one of my people screwed up or some mistake happened or some loss happened where the yield in this particular chip batch was going to be very low, I would be the first guy to go see my boss and say, Rodney, you're going to hear this, I know this, right? His concern, first concern always would be, do you really know what's going on in your department, right? So, declare it up front. Don't try to hide it. And then, by the way, another Indian tendency, abhi nahi bolte hain, chalega. Don't do that. Be totally upfront. So when you are that and the person knows that you will hear the right thing from him, you won't get into trouble most of the time, right? Give you one other example. When I was running this operation at Fairchild, it was a military operation, right? So when you seal a package with the chip inside, right, a ceramic package which is called hermetic in technical terms, that hermetic package is allowed only to contain certain ppm of moisture, right? So you are sealing it in a nitrogen environment furnace. But if the furnace control is not good, normal air leaks into it, then you have moisture, right? So when we were setting up new facility in another building, all of a sudden several batches of assembled packages came out with a lot higher moisture. So what's happening under my watch? Nobody else to blame, right? Did I examine the furnace profiles? Did I ask the right questions? You know, did I have the right person handling this, right? So when all this happened, because deliveries were impacted, right? If you don't have the right product. So I was fairly young in my career, right? And Rodney happened to be my boss at Fairchild, last phase. So I told Rodney up front that if this, requires me to resign, I'll resign. So when you do that, at least Rodney got the faith in my honesty and integrity. And next time, within a year, there was a problem with another staff member, right? So Rodney came to me unsolicited and said, tell me what is going on in this area. At that time I didn't know, but from the nature of questions I figured out that he was trying to check into what the other staff member had told him, right? So if you have that level of credibility with the boss, it's very open book, totally. Okay, I think we should end here. Anybody else? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Jai Janendra Bhai. So my question is pretty much about the health and how you keep yourself motivated, fit, and spiritually very up to date. And the reason I'm asking this is I have seen you more than 100 times in personal meetings, and today's was the best meeting that I learned a lot about you and yourself. So this is the one thing I'm just wanted to know, really, how do you keep yourself fit and keep going?
Well, fit. So first of all, I had to, thank nature for giving me good health, right? One of the reasons I have good health is because I saw my father with very poor health. He passed away at age 54, right? I told you he got TB in a very early age when he was in his mid-20s, right? And so that weakened him permanently. In those days, there was no streptomycin, so 2.5 of his ribs had to be surgically removed that were infected with TB, right? So he permanently lost the breathing capacity, right? And then later on, very late in his life, whether something dormant was there in his liver or whatever, but he developed liver trouble, right? And so he was generally a weaker person, right? Didn't exercise, never had fat or anything, right? But health was generally not good. Cold season, he would get cold and this and that. So I decided that I better have good health. So some exercising from my school days, okay? Now recently I have not, Rekha always touches here and says, you're not doing good, right? So, but some yoga, some pranayama, and stress management. That's the biggest thing, okay? Now, I don't get stressed out as much as I used to 15 years ago, right? So I'm saying, yeah, this is a problem, but I'm thinking more calmly and saying, you know, what do we do? What's the next step here? Talk to staff, do brainstorming, right? All that.
What about food?
Yeah, I was coming to that. So the food, of course, we're all vegetarians, but the quantity of food, as you grow, you have to reduce, right? So I have been doing that. My only weakness in food is I love sweets, so I am not very disciplined about that, right? So what you see here is from those sweets.
No diabetes, right?
No, no.
Good.
I have my health report, last chemistry was so good. My cholesterol is the lowest it has ever been, right? So, no, my chemistry is all good. Yes.
So impressive, Vipin bhai. Got to learn a lot more about you now today. Let me see if I can phrase my question. This is regarding next generation / the middle managers. In your time, there was a sense of loyalty, it looks like it appears that way. There was a sense of learning process. There was a sense of integrity. If you look at today and going forward, I think there is a big problem in terms of the trust in the middle management. Big problem. And there are not very many professional courses are being sort of demanded or in the companies, because a lot of Silicon Valley companies are, to begin with, they're from startup to IPO, and stock options and RSUs, those are the temptations of what to actually focus on. And the rest part goes in the technology area. So a lot of companies are not very well managed because the cost effectiveness has disappeared completely. If you run a project today, people don't focus on the cost aspect of the project. It's just we want to get the job done and move the product out to the market with a certain level of acceptance quality. That's all, right? So my question to you is this gonna get worse as we go forward? Or we will bring some new set of tools in the middle management area where people will be trained and they can actually manage the projects more effectively and mentor those people who are the young generation people coming in the company.
Yeah. So
sorry, it's a long question, but I wanted to set up the background.
So two things. So one is the cost.
Yeah.
Okay? In the software-related technologies, the cost is only the people cost of development, of testing, or whatever, right? There's no material cost. So it's like spending money on development and then you earn on it continuously, and so you can have sloppy cost structure. And this is one thing I always say, that the discipline that exists in the semiconductor industry of knowing your cost, right? So I mentioned about knowing your numbers, right? So I was supposed to know my yield variance for every day, saying, okay, what was my yield variance? Because if I don't know that, I get a call in the morning from Rodney saying, hey, this report shows, you know, a big yield variance today. Do you know what happened on the floor, right? So that kind of cost management doesn't even exist in the software business because they don't even know, right? When I was talking to my VPs in the software company saying, hey, why don't we know the cost? Because Bipin, you don't know software business, right? The easy answer always to me was, you don't know software, right? So how do you understand all this, right? Finally, I had to take control myself of this cost. And for the first time today, I know how many test cases my test engineer is creating per day, right? They didn't know that. They didn't care, right? So the costing is sloppy because, and the other aspect that is coming is this massive use of outsourced IT. Now, as an Indian, I feel good that these companies are doing good business, right? But if you look at it from a management standpoint, they're screwing up their clients royally. Really, I feel that way. Because in trying to put numbers into these companies based on which they get paid, they are not bringing any efficiency or automation or whatever improvements they should be bringing, because when they do that, the people numbers will decline, right? Because they're counting heads when they're saying what their revenue is. So, because I see that, I see Wipro doing testing at a company and saying, why are they still doing it this way, right? So, it's because of their greed, nothing else. And the guys that are running the IT on this other side either don't have the resources or the capability to question them, saying, you know. So, I still haven't answered your middle management question, right? So training is absolutely essential, I agree with you. But the pace at which companies are growing, right? Like take Facebook or Google or Yahoo or whatever, right? How do you keep up with that training? And how do you even keep up with the hiring the best? So that's a problem. What we have done recently, and this is all happening, recently, that we are introducing employee-to-employee knowledge sharing sessions, right? So a tester today gets up and talks to all other testers and developers saying what are some of their ideas on how to test better, right? And one thing I learned in software in the last 5 years is, hey, this testing thing is a big, big mystery in software. Because in chips we had very specific specs. You say, okay, you're supposed to test leakage on the output, you're supposed to test, what is the frequency response. So everything is very, very specific, and method is very specific. In testing software, the tester creates the use case. Now, whether that has exact relationship to the end customer using it or not, sometimes you don't know. And so all these bugs issue in software is taken very lightly. In a chip, one bug means fatal. So the lack of cost, knowledge or control in software, the relaxed environment about bugs, right? This agile methodology, for example, right, assumes that you're giving the customer a software that's not totally ready yet, right? You'll fix it in the next sprint, right? You'll fix it in the third sprint. So you say, okay, as a customer, am I supposed to keep taking these improvements, every week? And has anybody figured out what the cost of, handling all that is? I don't think people have. But about the human tendency, right? I don't think it changes drastically from generation to generation. That's my belief. That the methods are different, the circumstances are different, right? The cost structure may be different, but the basic human tendency on working, learning, delivering, being honest or dishonest doesn't change. Yes.
No, but there is a point here is the curiosity to learn and be effective today, and the curiosity to learn and be effective 20 years ago is absolutely different.
You mean it's less now?
Yes. In IC all the time.
But part of it may be fed by things like Google, where you say, I don't need to know this, I'll look it up when I need to know it, right? I mean,
Right.
It's very natural.
Yes.
Because the tool exists, right? You say,
Of course.
I don't need to memorize the direction to go to Napa where I'm going
Of
because
course.
I'll print it out from Google.
You're absolutely right. But the moment in that context, what you just said, if I don't have a cell phone, I don't have a navigation, I have no idea what I'm doing in my life. So
it's like not learning the fundamental, we say the paradigm, the multiplication tables, because you don't need to learn them. You just punch the numbers and you get the answer, right?
Right,
So-
but that whole common sense of dealing with the unknowns and be effective in the unknown environments, what you would have done in many of your situations, or you did, or many of your peers they did. If you put these people today, I mean, the learning process is degrading in my view. And that will some or the other way, it will create an impact, and we're so dependent on these tools. And if these tools didn't exist, or it doesn't exist going forward, we are totally handicapped.
Okay, so I'm not in a position to answer your question for two reasons, right? I mean, first of all, I'm not in as large an organization today as I used to be. So my knowledge is based on a limited number of people, like 100 or so currently. The methodology in the US versus India now, how much differential there is, I don't know recently. Okay? So the education in India, besides the top-notch schools, in a lot of these second and third tier schools is very poor. Okay, people are always talking about
Yep.
quality, right? And we, for example, in college recruiting, to get 10 recruits, we go through, start out with about 70, 80, right? You say, that's a huge dropout ratio, right? 7 to 8x. And that's because, and we only do, for the first screening, we only do two things, an aptitude test and some code writing test, right? And you say these graduates from some of the good schools, if they're dropping out at that rate, there is a cause for concern. But, I don't know. Okay, I think we better end this here. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.